Welcome to the Mycelium Forum of the Mycelium Signal Podcast, which features open-ended conversations with fellow occultists and artists. Tonight, here's my conversation with Colorado-based Karl Haikara of the Sol Nox Podcast. Please note, this episode was originally recorded for the Sol Nox Podcast, hosted by Karl Haikara. See the link in the show notes.
All right. Well, I'm glad to welcome Konstantin back to the podcast. It's been a minute since our last episode. I can't quite remember when our last one was.
Yeah, thanks for the invite again, and glad to be here. I think, actually, I don't even try to remember when it was, but it was this year, I would believe. Or was it like the last years towards the end?
I believe it was... Yes, our last episode was right at the end of last year, December 28th.
Yeah.
That's right. It was like my last episode I put out for the year. Yeah.
I don't even remember what we were talking about. The concept of the liminal has, of course, been like a mainstay in my own podcast, the Mycelium Signal, and in our mutual conversations as well.
Yeah. It was a good conversation. We hit upon I think some new ideas around the liminal. The thing about the liminal kind of concepts that we talk about is that they develop over time. So I'm sure somebody listening to the very first one we did a few years ago and this say the last one will probably see a development of as we discuss different ideas as well as some of the same ideas but in different ways. You know what I mean?
Yes, definitely, and it's the same about numinos, which is closely, of course, related to the liminal. And I finally managed to hold the panel discussion between Richard Gavin and Nas Alkamet from Oculus about numinos, like the extreme end of the numinos, the holy alien other, and that has already been published. But that's the same thing that I have been thinking about these themes for years and years, and they constantly get kind of like alchemically distilled, and it's somehow exhilarating to understand that there is no end in sight. You think you have reached some kind of like temporary end or the bottom of some kind of like investigation, and then you understand that there is a latch or a door through which you can get even deeper, and then you understand that you don't actually understand anything. This is the same with the liminal, and I actually have an interesting bit here about tonight. So basically, we had been talking about Karl about the new movie, the Backrooms, which is of course based on the internet meme, and I'm very well versed with the liminal spaces thing, and when I discovered the meme, the Backrooms around maybe it was 2020 or something, I then understood that I had been having this kind of liminal space dreams, which were quite identical to the Backrooms meme with the fluorescent lighting and the yellow tapestries and this kind of like the setting, which is very like vacant office-like. But in my own dreams, the space was kind of like new apartment, which was around maybe 200 square meters long, in size, and it had multiple rooms, and it had this like a whole carpet in the floor, which was like spanning the whole width of the whole floor. And then I understood in those dreams that I have now finally enough space for a new studio or whatever, and then I understood that something was amiss in that kind of dreams, that the space felt odd in the sense that I was alone, like deliberately alone, but then I understood that I wasn't alone. There was something with me, some kind of like a presence, and then it hit me that I would have to live in this kind of space, which was very liminal, very eerie, and somehow occupied with something like the other. And then I understood that this goddamn meme had kind of like stole my whole idea. And then I understood that people had really gone like almost insane with this meme, and it had really gone like, how would you say, to live its own life. And now it resulted like maybe it was I don't remember which year, the short film by Cain Pixel, that was the pen name for this director, released this YouTube shorts. And now I believe it was like A24 production company, which was the same which released Hereditary, I think, released this like a feature-length film, Backrooms. Was it this or the last week?
It was like 2 weeks ago. And yeah, Cain, I think his video started like 5 years ago, like when he was like 15. It's crazy. But yeah, and I actually was not familiar with his short films. And I was familiar with the idea of, I knew the meme from Backrooms, but like you, I've had dreams, the same type of dreams of these type of spaces that are kind of horrific in their blandness in a way, but there's things that kind of wrong. There's a presence there. Everything that you described, I've had the exact same type of dreams. That was the thing when I saw Backrooms last week, was like watching a movie that perfectly captured the feeling of some of these dream spaces I've been,
Yes, it's got something else. I mean, there's the Silent Hill, like the foggy small town liminal, and there is the most well-known liminal settings, like the parking lot at night or the park at night and this kind of thing. But this kind of weird office space liminal is a different beast in the sense that it's I don't know what's so creepy about it, but in the original short film, which I rewatched just half an hour ago, there was this scene where the protagonist with the video camera kind of like no clips or kind of falls out of the reality into a different level of the liminal space of the backrooms. And there's this instance where he looks through a window and he sees a kind of like a view of apartment building with windows. And that is another scene I have also seen in my own dreams. This kind of nocturnal sight of a city of apartment buildings with lots of apartments and their windows, a bit like Silent Hill, The Room game.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yep. Yeah, that's the kind of genius of the concept, is that it can be any there's so many things that could happen in those spaces, whatever somebody can dream. I mean, one thing I'm really impressed by the Backrooms movie is the way that the director, I mean, he's 20 years old, and he makes a lot of his stuff in Blender, I guess, like the designs. But then when they made the movie, they built all these sets like in a studio, like a huge 30,000 square foot studio. They built these like crazy sets that he designed, and people would get lost and stuff. But can you imagine just being in that? It kind of brought to life that space. You can actually wander the back rooms. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
And to me, that's really, it's really impressive. I really like the way that it twists, changes, and seems to replicate certain things. Like in the movie, there's a part, like not really just spoiling anything. This is a part that there's a somebody falls down this shaft that goes down into this other level that's like dark and dingy and covered with like dirty clothing and like smells like rot, and you actually see this like shadow thing down there for a minute, like scurry away, like it's like you fell into like the spider den or something,
Yeah.
And it reminded me of like Shelob or something from Lord of the Rings. And I felt like it's like the hardest thing. There's this predatory entity, but there's also could be seen, the space is supposed to be kind of like kind of creating itself around like the fragments of our memories or our subconscious and things like this, right? It's like a literalization of internal spaces. And so this kind of made me think of like as you fall down into the kind of center of the labyrinth of you, where you confront the Minotaur, but it's like just some type of monster there down there at the center of us all,
Yes, the monstrum, of course, and I think that's a good analogy that Backrooms is kind of like your own psyche, the corridors of your own psyche, and it's not only related to the office space style like yellowish backrooms, but it's also this kind of catabolic dreams which I have had in which, for example, I have been in a apartment building elevator, and it has descended below the level 0. It is completely impossible. It's completely insane. The normal elevators, of course, don't do that. But in these kinds of dreams, I have entered in some kind of like the back rooms of the apartment building, in the sense that there is this normal basement, but I have been in the basement beyond the basement, if you catch my drift.
Yeah.
And there has been this like boiler rooms and this kind of stuff. And it is completely vacant. And it has this centuries old, the liminal, like a ooze or dust, and it's somehow magical, and it's very foreboding and eerie. And I have had dreams in which I have been in the shadow cottage of my own cottage, in the sense that one particular dream, I found some kind of space. I understood it was actually a gateway into like a basement system. And then I understood that in the relatively small cottage, there was like a whole World War II era bunker beneath it. And then I started to venture in the bunker, and it was like completely vast, somewhat reminiscent of the Silent Hill. And I then understood that why on earth hasn't my family told me about this kind of bunker beneath the cottage? And I was especially mad at my father that he had withheld this kind of magnificent bunker from my knowledge. And then I just understood that maybe my father doesn't even know about this bunker. And then it came to me that I could hold some events there, or do some rituals or whatever, like make a absolutely massive studio there, and the possibilities were endless. But usually these kind of spaces have been such foreboding and eerie that the first thing isn't that I should build a studio in there, if you catch my drift.
Yeah. Well, something I really think about with these type of ideas, like that the Backrooms made me think of, is that the idea of, so you have the, in the Kabbalah, you have like the Qliphoth and the Sephiroth, right? Like the day side and night side of the tree. Often the night side of the tree is seen as almost like a mirror, or the shadow. It's obviously the shadow side, the other side of the day side, right? So often it's kind of like, let's say you take, I don't know, like, Yesod, right? Like the moon. The moon, the shadow side is Gamma Leo. And often it's like, essentially you go through some type of tunnel or doorway, and then suddenly you're into kind of like the other side of things, which also makes me think of a lot of the ideas around like people disappearing into like the fairy side of reality, or things like this. Like, but what I'm getting at is that the thing about this other side, particularly like the lower tunnels that are like running from Malkuth to Gamaliel, are often kind of like the place for the as in Kambanda they call the Kumbas, these type of shells, these wandering shells of kind of vampiric entities, parasitic entities, things like this, like that, because essentially that those earlier shells, earlier like tunnels that lead that roll through these areas are kind of made up of the detritus of our world, like there's and draws these entities which come and feed off of all the negative emotions people have, and all our trash, basically, all our shadow side, right? Like there's the all the rot that people, try to hide away is contained within these tunnels closer to our area. And that's kind of what the Backrooms when you think of as these type of, you step through this doorway and you go into the literally like the tunnels is set essentially, but these like lower ones that are closer to us. And then as you descend, it's also the kind of paradoxical descent and ascent as you see with the Qliphoth.
Yes, this is actually quite fascinating in the sense that, firstly, the backrooms being like, how would you say, the hidden layers of the psyche, like manifest in some kind of like semi-physical spaces, and this kind of idea that there are some entities or ecosystem which has its bottom feeders, like in the ocean floor, there are entities which feed from the waste of other animals. And I think this kind of like a parasitic, non-physical entities is highly intriguing in the sense that, whereas I'm quite a radically non-dualist in the sense that I don't attribute the good and evil of the monotheistic religions to the so-called daimonic world, but then again it would be a bad idea to completely dismiss the concept that in the animal kingdom the lion is not evil when it eats its prey. For example, it's not an act of evil; it's an act of sustaining itself. It is the circle of life, and then some kind of parasitic worm which you could get from some parts of the Africa. That's not evil, as Ebola is not evil in the sense. It's just like a human conception that these entities are evil, but they are like. Then again, we would think that the humans are evil because we cause such destruction on the planet and to each others. So basically, it's very hard to say what is evil or is anything actually evil. It depends on your point of view. But nevertheless, this kind of concept is highly intriguing in the sense that there is some kind of backstage or something which is manifested in different, how would you say, ways. It depends on the viewer, and I think these are also like archetypal imagery.
Yeah, well, and I think that one thing about those type of entities is that, yeah, I think some aren't necessarily evil, but they are often made up or they have elements of us, like we create them sometimes, right? Like, and they can be malevolent in the sense that they don't really desire good for anybody, maybe because they feed off of pain and suffering, and there are just things like this, right? But that doesn't necessarily make them evil per se, but they aren't like, they're baneful for us, like, and not good to have around. But there are out there, they're out there, in my opinion, in the demonic world. And I think that the movie definitely gets into that. Like they're definitely, and I know that short movies do as well. Like when you watch Rust, they develop this idea of these shadow entity things in the Backrooms, and that's what really made me think of it like that. There are it literally is kind of like this literalization of this esoteric idea of these Kimbas, these shell entities out there feed, psychic vampires and things feeding off of people in the tunnels,
Yes, and it definitely brings to my mind something which I may have had discussed this with you, but here it goes again because it's really pertinent here, because I think these kind of things manifest through dreams. So basically, when I was 20, I'm now nearing 50, so it was around maybe less than 30 years ago, I had this recurrent sleep paralysis nightmares, where I kind of woke up in that nightmare in another dimension, in the sense that it was like a mock version of this reality in the sense that it felt very real, but it felt very wrong. And in those sleep paralysis nightmares, I was, for example, kind of like meditating or sitting on a floor of an apartment which was almost completely dark, or it was like murky. And when I looked outside, it was completely dark, and it was like in autumn in Finland, so quite fucking dark. So I felt that there was some kind of entity circling around me like a rabid dog. If you have ever been in a situation where you encounter like a huge dog, which is, of course, somewhat like suspicious or even furious, and it's kind of like sniffs you and it circles around you, and you try to not to move because that would kind of provoke an attack. So in that dream or nightmare, some kind of entity was doing the same to me, but I couldn't see it. I just sensed it. And it was like Nas said in the Bardo methodology Oculus interview, that these kind of entities evoke this kind of metaphysical dread or even panic. And this was the same for me, like many years, like around 20 years before I even heard what Nas said about this thing. So basically, these goddamn dreams just recurred over and over again, and it was different places and different liminal spaces, but they were like the fabric was made of thread. It was just insanely foreboding, and the wrongness was permeating through everything. And I once wrote a story about this, which I said that it was like inhabited by a god, whose presence was a suffocating shroud. And these dreams once finally stopped. But before they stopped, I thought that this kind of realm, even though it was clearly in a nightmare, felt so real that it was like an alternate dimension. I pretty much feared that someday I wouldn't kind of find my way out of that space, because it was wrong, but it felt very, very real, like a bad trip manifest.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it is something like, it's there. I think that exists on a slightly different level of our consciousness, but I actually don't even know if it's another dimension. I think it's just another part of reality that's like right here with us, and those things definitely do exist, in my opinion. Those entities, and I have as well encountered similar experiences in my life, particularly with the sleep paralysis, which is why I get kind of frustrated at people who say that sleep paralysis is just like a biological function, because it's like, just because you can explain the biological mechanism of how it operates doesn't mean you can't explain why it happens. You're explaining how it happens, but not why it happens. And why it happens. Why do people always see these entities when they have these experiences? Very few people ever have sleep paralysis without having entities, and so. But anyways, like, I really I do think that these things are shells. They're things that we can create. I do think that they're born from pain and suffering, much like in Twin Peaks. Judy gives birth to these entities through like pain and suffering. They feed on they call it, the garbanzola or whatever, like the I can't think of the word is garbanzonia or whatever. I can't like they feed off of pain and suffering, and I would say that they're the closest thing to something that is evil in the universe, as far as like the kind of classical conception of the classical idea of evil. I think that's the closest thing you can get to, because something that whole existence is there to cause pain and suffering and feed off of it, is probably what we could call evil in a kind of classical sense.
I agree in the sense that it seems like there is intergenerational suffering and evil, in the sense that there are known cases in Finland for, like in some families, like many generations have been like full of domestic violence, drugs, alcohol, and like a sexual abuse and this kind of thing. So it's basically like the sins of the fathers, like getting inherited through generations, like the Mark of Cain. And there's this Finnish band the band has ceased to be, but it was called Sleep of Monsters, and they have this absolutely great track called Land of Nod, which tells the story of Cain through the lyricist. He's called Ike Will, and I know the guy, and he's a great lyricist and singer. And in that track, he kind of like does a spiritual autopsy of the offspring of Cain, in the sense that I would go to the lyrics because I don't have them here, but I would advise people to check that track out. But nevertheless, it kind of makes a great argument that sins of your fathers you will do, and in this case, I think this kind of the evil which happens in mankind, it's obviously something which is kind of inherited. For example, if you would have been abused yourself or me as a child, and if that would have broken our like a spiritual backbone or our kind of like a will, then we would kind of be infested with the evil, or be able to kind of be doomed to repeat the evil, to kind of bring about suffering to the world. And I'm not trying to sound moralistic here. On the contrary, in the sense that it seems like this is something which cannot be avoided. I think Jordan Peterson said it very well, that in the lowest rungs of society, that's not a good place for anybody. It's like the weak predate on the even weaker people. It's like a karmic kind of thing. It's a spiral which goes ever downwards. And I would think this is directly projected to the demonic world as well. But I don't think it's not evil in the biblical sense. But then again, it wouldn't be a good idea to kind of inject yourself with fucking Ebola, even though Ebola isn't evil, but it's not a good thing for your system.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I definitely think so. There's in certain Native American ideas, like they believe that they believe in this thing of like ancestral knots and things like this. So like some I've heard of people going to like medicine men, and they'll like go who are still active nowadays, and they'll do some type of like I don't know, like some type of shamanic thing, and they'll go, well, you have like these there's a big belief system that maybe like an ancestor of yours did certain things, right? And you're still carrying the price for that. Or there's a wound, some type of wound that occurred to the soul of your ancestors, that you carry on within yourself. And that's a pretty common traditional idea across a large part of the world, that like, and it's actually not 100% far off from DNA. They find that like what was used to be so-called junk DNA actually contains a huge amount of information stored from all our ancestors. That things that happen to our ancestors are literally in our blood. Like, and I think this kind of manifests, and there's tons of stories across all kinds of folklore of the idea of the cursed family, right? Like something. You think of even go back to, I don't know, like Hound of the Baskervilles, right? Like their family's cursed, or all these different things. Of course, in that story, it's like people making the curse happen, but there's other stories where it's not. Plenty of weird fiction stories and horror stories and folklore and mythology discusses the cursed family where. And I think that, it could be that, a shadow is following them. Shadow gets attached to them for some deed that somebody did in the past. And, that it can be hard to dislodge that,
I definitely agree. And if you think about the epigenetics, that some kind of like a traumatic memory in my grandfather could be imprinted in the gene, in my genes, in the sense that this has been studied, but I'm not sure that if this has been scientifically studied, but I think the science is actually backs this up. For example, in Finland, we had major war against the Soviet Union in around the 40s last century.
Yeah.
So basically, a lot of people, my generation's grandfathers have fought in the war, and that, of course, caused a huge trauma because that was a very, very bloody war, and it was like an existential war in the sense that it was against Soviet Union. And I would believe that that alone has caused suffering in the Finnish gene pool and in the generations to come. And I believe the next generation from me upwards is going to be more kind of cleansed from the epigenetic load of that trauma. So I would think that if you think about the history of Russia, it is like full of just incredible pain and suffering, and of course the Soviet era comes to mind, Stalin and whatnot. It seems like whole country's spiritual backbone can be actually pretty badly maligned. I think what you were after, that if the trauma is so great, it kind of creates this kind of like cycle, which is very hard to break. This is completely a like imaginary example that there's a person whose grandfather was very heavily abused, and this turned the grandfather into a monster who abused his grandfather and who abused his offspring and so on. So it's like, how could this kind of generational curse even break? It is possible, but it's not likely, you know.
It's difficult, yeah, and when you're talking about it as far as a group of people as well, then it gets even more complicated. You think about Russia, like you're getting into the idea of like the group soul of a place, and Russia. The thing is that structure that they have has been so firmly ingrained in them from the Tsar era, essentially for the entire history. The only time that they haven't been under some form of dictatorship and has been, a very brief period of time between the fall of Soviet Union and Putin taking control,
Yeah.
like about 20 years, there's about, I can't remember when he took over, like the 2000s. So like they had maybe roughly 20 years of like an attempt at freedom, before it, again, that, just got demolished. And I think that there's just a quality that, for whatever reason, that's just inherent within their belief structure. You think about the Middle East. I mean, you go all the way back to the Babylonian and Sumerian age. People, they were a very violent. They had this great civilization, but they were extraordinarily like violent and bloodthirsty in a way that I don't think anybody can really comprehend. I mean, they made pyramids of skulls and would completely decimate entire like cities, like just absolute violence. And we see that type of behavior still going on today. Thousands of years later, they still act in this barbaric ways to each other. And it's like. It just feels like there are certain things that are just kind of ingrained in people and on some deep level,
Yeah, and this is absolutely unnerving that there is also kind of parasites, like real world parasites, like Toxoplasma gondii, which is contracted from cat feces. And for example, it kind of, the cycle of Toxoplasma gondii is something like this. A rat get infected by this kind of brain infecting parasite, which kind of takes away the rat's natural aversion to cats, and apparently it makes the rats kind of sexually attracted to the cats, which is completely the opposite to the evolutionary wiring of the rat, because that would get the rat killed, which is exactly the idea of the Toxoplasma gondii. So it can enter the bloodstream of the cat and then kind of prolong its cycle. we don't even know that what kind of other things may be at play when it comes to human violent tendencies and this kind of thing. But that's just like a scientific example that this kind of very simple parasite, which has the cat and rats as hosts, can also infect humans as well. In pregnant women, there is like a long-standing notion that they shouldn't handle the cat litter box because Toxoplasma gondii also causes like fetal damages.
There's a lot of things, and I've been reading David Beth's new book, The Black Pilgrimage, and in it he talks about the idea of the demonic level and the soul, and that a lot of things can have be ensouled, like this kind of almost animist idea that we're essentially living in a teeming world of souls and ensouled things, and something that can be ensouled is the soul of a people or a place or an item, all kinds of things, right? And so I do think that there is a soul of a people. There's a soul, like if you what you've inherited from your past, as well as the soul of the place you are in. There's all kinds of things that make us up. That's why I think we are like a soul complex. Like we are we're not made up of like just one thing or two things. Like, I think of the book Steppenwolf of Hermann Hesse, and, in that book, the main character thinks that he's Steppenwolf, like a man. He's like two souls. He's got a man's soul and a Steppenwolf soul. And in the book, he encounters these this kind of magic show experience, and in that experience he essentially is told, like, men are a multitude of souls, like we're not just one or two, we are like many. And the reason I bring that up is that I think that we are made up of multiple things. Like, you can think about particularly that's one of the, I think, the complications of, say, the America, for example, that say like myself, like part of my family's been here for a long time, and like on my mom's side, and has and then my father's side came to this country only 100 years ago, or some 120 years ago. So it's like, you think about like 140, I guess, but you think about like that. So that means like there's a big part of me that's very connected to the Europe, but then there's also part of me that's here, and I've grown up in this certain part of the country, and you start to like, you are affected by the place you grew up, right? Like there's a big part of me that I know has been shaped by this particular part of the West that I'm from, and that all those factors, put you together. But it's probably more simple if you are living in a place where your family's lived for millennia. You know what I mean?
Yes. It doesn't create that kind of divide. And I also of that mind that the human mind is not a monolith. I think it's a legion, and this is something we have probably talked before. And it has came very clear to me that I am not my mask, I am not my persona, I am not my working character, obviously. And few decades of working with the magic, the occult, and the liminal and the numinous, and whatever kind of altered states has really taught me that I definitely am not a monolith. I was just talking about the shadow personas with my colleague the other day. We were talking about that normal people don't probably understand how they are manipulated and how they are driven by their shadows, in the sense that they just sometimes do stuff which seems a bit out of character, but that just happens because they don't understand what they did wasn't in their main character, in the sense that if a person like us who is well versed in this kind of material, I think you understand this phenomenon if I say that I am so well, how would you say, versed and acquainted with my own different shadows, that when I hear like some kind of thought which is absolutely Machiavellian or ruthless, or like this kind of extremely survival driven, this kind of like a singular thought which just pops in my head, I kind of flag it up, but I don't condemn or morally judge that kind of thought. Then I just understand this is a part of me which has been born through some periods of my life which has required just that complete focus on the survival, and it is completely unfit in any kind of normal setting. It is basically the states of emergency part of your soul or your mind. It's even somewhat, how would you say, it's not disturbing, but it's worth note taking to me that I have just stopped in that moment, and I have thought to myself that this sound or idea is quite sound in the sense, but it's absolutely divorced from everyday civilized world.
Yes, I understand. Yeah. Yeah, it's like essentially, yeah, I agree. Like I think that if you're not really in tune with yourself, you don't really understand yourself, it's very easy to be taken for a ride by your by your shadow side, you know what I mean?
Yes.
Like it's very, very easy. You like just I really do think that, like we had you have to be very careful with that kind of stuff, you can't like I guess the way I think about it is this, like we see people like this every day, we see people who are not in touch with their shadow side, who are they also make themselves very much easier prey for the type of entities we were describing earlier.
Yes.
I really think that I think about like in Twin Peaks with Leland Palmer, like there's a man who probably never even thought about his shadow side, but he had these dark urges, and he did some dark things even before Bob took him over, right? He was going to One-Eyed Jacks and stuff even before Bob, but this little crack of into the darkness within him was enough for Bob to come in, and then he satisfied his darkest urges on his daughter and stuff like that. And I think that that's the thing. People who are totally unconscious, like unself conscious, they have no self awareness. Yeah, they're gonna be open to the influence of other things, and they're also going to be open to the influence of their shadow to do things that are totally, they might do something and then go, "Why the hell did I do that?" Like I don't know why I did that.
Definitely. I think that this manifests in road rage and in like domestic violence and these kind of things usually in humans. And I think the people who are of that mind that they don't possess any evil side, or they don't possess a dark side or the shadow, I think those kind of like a goody two shoes type of people who think they are like a shining example of morality, like exemplars in the moral, I think they are probably the worst kind of people in the sense that their shadow is operating like under the radar in the sense. I think Jordan Peterson also said something like, when a mother says that I couldn't harm my child in any way, is probably doing something like this because he doesn't understand that she has the capacity for evil in the sense. And I think it would be like a great antidote against the shadow running wild for people to understand what Kyle Rasmussen of Vitriol said once in also my interview with him. He had this great line that you are much worse than you think you are. We all are. And I think the latter part is great in the sense that nobody, I mean, absolutely nobody can get away from the judgment in the sense that every fucking one of us possess this kind of like dark personality traits. And I think some of them are actually based on evolutionary psychology and survival in the sense. For example, the Machiavellian trait, which is probably the third or fourth weight of the dark quadrology. I think in some kind of, for example, in the intelligence world or some kind of corporate world and or whatever in the war, I would think that whereas Machiavellian traits are very bad in normal everyday life, they can be life-saving skills in some kind of like extreme environments. So I wouldn't dismiss or judge them completely at like a face value. And I would think that normal people should read history and read also, for example, the atrocities of the Soviet Union and even the atrocities which in the Second World War, which Allied forces also did. So basically, it's not just the usual suspects. If you dig deep enough, you see like absolutely horrifying stuff. For example, the Unit 731, I would believe, the Imperial Japanese unit of like the medical unit who did this kind of human experiments, which were so absolutely deranged and evil in every sense of the word that most people don't even know about. But they, of course, know about the usual suspects in the history. So I think this also history has like a shadow side. And I would think that if people would somehow be totally, if they somehow would be very like in a 4D sense, they would understand the absolutely unhinged madness of the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, in the killing fields, what they did to people over there too. I mean, in addition of what they know what the Nazis did in the Holocaust, that would kind of complete the picture, and people would understand that history is not as bloody as they think. It's so much more worse, and nobody kind of gets scot-free from this evil, you know.
No, yeah, and people believe a lot of myths and things. You have to study the shadow side to challenge these like myths you've been told. We've all been told many, many myths throughout our whole lives and history, like, and you have to challenge them and see what's true. I mean, that's the case, like in a lot of things, like there's still a lot of people, like I have a great deal of like say like here in the States with like the I always I always felt like kind of like we should have the kind of like bad for like the Native Americans, that's in the sense of like that we came and took all their stuff, but at the same time like they put on a big fight as well, and it wasn't like they just rolled over, right? Like plenty of atrocities happen on both sides. Like I feel like but a lot of times people like to just do the platitudes. You know what I mean? Like they try to just go, yeah, like go, oh, we shouldn't even be here, like all this stuff, without thinking about the fact that every culture, or they try to like idolize the natives, like of different places. Like you think about the noble savage idea, and these like leftists today will scoff at the noble savage, but they still do it, but it's like everybody's violent, Native Americans
Yes.
worship the warrior and were horribly violent just as much as white people are. Everybody's violent. All humans have violence within our hearts. You know what I mean? Like it's just it's a fact of nature. We have to have violence. We can't survive without violence. I hate to break it to people, but it's like, to some people, but it's like violence is inherent to all reality. All reality is essentially doing violence to each other.
Yes, it's like the saying that violence isn't the answer except when it is the answer, in the sense that this kind of like absolute pacifism, in the sense that, for example, I heard about this guy who was some kind of reporter, I would believe, that he was such a pacifist that he said that when he was working in the Middle East in actually very, very dangerous, like a civil war or war zones with his girlfriend or lady friend, And I would believe this guy actually said something that if his wife or lady friend would get mugged or, or worse by the warring militias, he wouldn't intervene because he's such like a pacifist that he couldn't intervene if it would happen in front of him. This really like broke some circuit in my mind, in the sense that this is like completely opposed to basic human evolutionary psychology, in the sense that how could somebody so ideologically deluded that he wouldn't even defend his own wife or lady friend, in the sense that if he could do something about it. And I would even imagine that being his 10 lady friend, I believe they have divorced since. I would think that if I would be the lady friend, I wouldn't want to travel with this kind of person. It would be completely insane that if we would get into some fight or whatever, and you would say to me beforehand that you wouldn't have my back on that kind of like situation. Who would ever want to be a friend with a guy or a woman who would say that like firsthand, that I wouldn't, defend yourself if I would have the capability?
That's the kind of ultra... not to sound like one of those people, but it's like kind of the ultra weak people that we've created in our culture today, And I'm sure there's been other times of high civilization that had this same type of things. Like, I imagine in ancient Rome, the height of the Roman Empire, there was probably like these like soft like Romans who like just like to have sex and go to the baths, who like couldn't have met, who like were probably complete cowards, you know what I mean? Like, or couldn't imagine doing any type of thing. Like, anytime this type of person will exist across everything, but it is an kind of insane point of view as well, to particularly if you are putting yourself in dangerous situations. I mean, like why would you be traveling through fucking war-torn landscapes with zero like actual survival skills,
Yes, this is just insane. But I think this is something I discussed with a Finnish guest in a special episode we had about Nietzsche's last man concept, which I think you know. So basically, it seems like this kind of society actually produces people who are so deluded and diverse from the so-called like a concrete reality, in the sense that concrete reality is the gravity. It is like a punch to your nose. It's like a car accident. You cannot negotiate with this kind of situation. And then again, people seem to be living in some kind of virtual reality, which they think they are completely like in a safe space bubble. But when that fucking bubble bursts, then what those people do, they are like completely broken. And that's like when the ontological cell or the bubble is broken, I would believe that's like a next level long-lasting trauma, which some people won't ever even recover from. So it just boggles my mind that in Finland and probably in the States too, there are like this kind of semi-professional wannabe cyclists which cycle on the roads with cars and trucks. And I just saw a video about like this kind of large truck, and it had a small space on the left of the truck between the truck and the fence. And this fucking idiot cyclist just had to cycle in that narrow space. And of course, the truck had some kind of malfunction, or he didn't even understand that this cyclist was on the left side, and the cyclist was completely demolished by the truck. And this was also captured by the point of view camera with the cycle. So this kind of idiocy is just absolutely mind-boggling to me.
Yeah. One of the things I can't describe how much I despise are fucking cyclists.
Yeah.
They are literally some of the most like selfish, like self-centered pieces of shit in the world. Like, they think that everybody in the world needs to bow to them, when you're out on the road. Like, I hate them. Up here in the mountains, when you drive up the mountains, like, it's one of the worst things in the summer is dealing with all the fucking cyclists, and you have to drive around them, and they're like blocking up these like mountain roads, all windy mountain roads, and you're stuck going like 2 miles an hour behind all these fucking assholes. You know, like, I hate them. I don't understand why they think they can just rule the road like they're a car or something. Like it doesn't surprise me. I mean, I had a fucking cyclist run right into me downtown one time, like, because he wasn't paying attention. You know, like, I hate these people. You know, like I'm not when I was a kid, I used to bicycle. You know, but I also didn't make a fool of myself and ride in the middle of streets. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I rode on like sidewalks or on like paths, like bicycle paths and things like that. You know what I mean? Like there's no way I would have rode right in the middle of the street when in fact we're told not to, you know?
Yeah, it's completely insane. I once, when I was tripped down the memory lane, I was probably 10 or something, and I managed to get in a car accident with my bike, and that was absolutely and completely my own fault, in the sense that I kind of rammed it right through a speeding car. It was like riding about 40 or 50 kilometers per hour, and it struck me, and it was
Oh, wow.
it was just like a blind luck that I didn't get demolished, but somehow my bike got the worst impact. But then again, I survived. But after that, I have been in 0 car accidents, because that was a lifelong antidote. And I think to bring this back to the world of the occult and the esoteric, I would think that this same analogy is fitting with the New Age people, the neo-pagan, the neo-pagan light, and this kind of New Age people, in the sense that they are so like full of light and this kind of peace, love, and understanding, that they don't properly even understand what kind of human parasites are circling these kind of scenes, which is well documented, and because they always have some kind of like scandals about sexual like a predation and whatever, you know, because that kind of scenes attract the predator. But I would think that it doesn't just fucking end there. I would even believe that these kind of people are also prone to this kind of like non-corporeal parasitic entities too.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I would definitely agree. Yeah. I mean, it's actually pretty interesting because for the most part in our circle of things, like on the more left-hand path, there's not as much like reports of people like, you know, guys coming around taking advantage of women and stuff like that in the same ways like the New Age world or other parts of the esoteric world, you know, like people who are involved with Crowleyism and ceremonial magic in particular, like are very prone to really taking advantage of people sexually and stuff like that. And I think there's something about it. I do think there's an aspect because of a lot of things you think about ceremonial magic and itself, like so much of that magic is inherently you know, you read a lot of those old grimoires. I mean, they definitely were written by good people, you know, written by people who want to enslave spirits and enslave other people's wills and do things, you know, like it's not a lot of those say like a Goetia, a lot of the forms of Goetic magic are about like enslaving a demon essentially and making it do your will and making some woman like want to have sex with you and doing, you know, like it's very glow type of stuff, you know. It's very it's not respectful of the spiritual world, it's not respectful of the world around you, and yet they wrap themselves up with the cloak of righteousness and Jesus' name and Adonai and all this bullshit, you know what I mean? Like to me, like it's not surprising that say like ceremonial magic and by extension Selama gets a lot of these type of people. I think New Age gets a lot of people. New Age and Wicca, I mean, in general, I think you have to be pretty low IQ to like be attracted to a lot of that stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's like an entry level stuff, in the sense that it doesn't take much. It's like listening to some kind of mainstream metal. It doesn't take anything except like money from your purse, in the sense that it's just yeah. It's too easy, and I would think that some parts of the left-hand path and these kind of like antinomian traditions are so like how would you say, heavy in the sense, heavy on the individual in the sense that it kind of antidotes yourself against this kind of parasitism, in the sense that if you are of the antinomian disposition, you are probably not that easily manipulated, because you question everything and you are constantly kind of having this kind of alchemical distillation. But in the ceremonial magic, I would think that it's usually quite hierarchical, in the sense that there are degrees and whatnot. And I absolutely agree about Goêteia, in the sense that it sounds absolutely a bad idea to kind of summon or invoke some spirits and manipulate, extort, and kind of to use the credentials of some like higher entities and this kind of thing, whatever they think they are or whatever they even are. It's basically like the same that if you were my older brother and I would secretly steal your like ID to buy some booze from the store, and it's that kind of fraud. And I think this kind of stuff just plays to the worst vices of the human mind, in the sense that it's like a dirty trick to get off easily. It's basically stealing something from the store instead of like getting your own money and actually fucking buying it.
Yeah, and it's this quality to it as well, where it's a hiding, it's an unwillingness to interact with the demonic entities, to really interact with the spiritual level in a one-to-one way, by hiding behind this illusionary power of your god. You know what I mean? Like it's like, you can understand the mindset of where it come from, but it actually was even prior to Christianity, because you look at like the PGM. A lot of the PGM is the same way. A lot of it's very, very reprehensible. A lot of the spells in the PGM are not good. They're not like morally right in any sense of the sense. Like, I'm not talking about good and evil. I'm just saying like bad or things that are not. In my opinion, not. I don't really believe in coercing people's wills and stuff like that. You know what I mean? And that's what a lot of the PGM stuff is about: coercing other people's wills and like I said, enslaving spirits and making them do your will instead of creating a relationship with them. I'm a big believer that you should create a relationship with these entities and these spirits, and only then, once you created this relationship, ask them to help you with things, because then, I don't know, to me that makes more sense. Because here's the thing I always thought of ever since I was a teenager. I was like, these people do this like magic rituals and they coerce these entities, and what do you do when you let them go? And suddenly you've made an enemy of something that's probably much more powerful than you are. You know what I mean?
Definitely. This is exactly what I've been thinking, that when I discovered Frater Acker's this website called Goêteia.com, I would believe. And this Goêteia, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, but it is the ancient original Goêteia from the ancient Greece. And that was basically, I would believe, to be some kind of chthonic sorcery type of material involved in the very original history of the Greece back in the day. And those people were the like veilers, I would believe. And maybe Goêteia actually meant to veil. I believe those were the people who were at the funerals doing the veiling rituals and this kind of thing. And I think Frater Acker said that these original Goes were the sorcerers and the people who were living in a kind of like ecosystem with these entities with the demonic world, instead of the later Goêteia, like was it in the 1600s, or when was the second Goêteia born? So basically, it's completely the opposite, and I would believe that it's more better to have this kind of holistic approach to the demonic world, to be in the same ecosystem, not to hide in some magical circle and kind of extort and to kind of brag about having the God at your side. So that's also a bit reprehensible.
The thing that's funny about all these people, though, the people engaged in that kind of magic, is bad things always happen to them in the end. In the end, they always get
Yes.
theirs. And no wonder. You're out there like, yeah, behind your magic circle, and you think you're you're invincible there, but you eventually you can't live behind a magic circle your whole life. Like, and I think that I just think that it's misguided and idiotic mindset. This is, the same type of mindset that humans have exhibited in the past, like of hunting areas, hunting animals to extinction and shit like that. It's like it's a kind of like thought process like that I can just do whatever I want with no consequences, and
Yes.
like again, people have always been around to point out that there are consequences, and I'm very much I'm very much ecological oriented person. I believe in, and I believe that in all senses of the words. I think all parts of reality are ecological, from the spiritual world, the demonic around us is an ecology, the, to even being in the city, like the environment of interacting with these other human beings is a type of ecology.
Yes, I think it's directly reflected to whatever that daimonic world is. And this brings to my mind, you have had Sea Billet on your podcast at least a few times, I would believe. And I've had
Many
some
times,
words with him too. Didn't he have some good points on this very subject? I have this kind of notion in my mind.
Yeah, he posted a video where he was talking about the PGM and everything.
Yes, that one. Yes.
Yeah, he and I have been talking. Part of the reason I brought it up, I guess, because he and I have been talking about this stuff
Yeah.
in our own personal conversations over the past few months. So it's been on my mind.
Yeah, it was very refreshing. I actually told this to him. I had a small chat with Sea like some weeks ago, I would believe, and it was my intention to get back on the discussion. So, Sea, if you're listening to this, I haven't forgotten, but it was so refreshing to hear his ideas about this, and I really applauded that. Yes, finally somebody is talking about real stuff and being serious about this thing. And because you don't absolutely hear this stuff too often. Another a great example who has had this kind of point of view is that the Frater Ackert I just mentioned. You of course know him too.
Yeah, I would say like Shea Belay and then Frater Akkad, David Beth,
Yes,
what's
Richard
his name?
Gavin.
Rick Gavin,
Yeah,
Jake Stratton
Nas.
Kent.
Cool.
Yeah, Jake Stratton Kent talked a lot about this kind of stuff about making a relationship with entities. Nicholas Friswold. There are people out there who have brought this up, but there's still a very large part of the esoteric world which is caught up in I see like the kind of mindset we're talking about as honestly being the more ancient viewpoint. It's the viewpoint that's most common amongst our particular area, our ancient Western forebears. You can still see this type of mindset in places like Japan, certain forms, Native
Like
Americans can still
Shinto.
exist. Yeah, like this idea of us existing in ecology and you also see this in stuff like Kambanda, down in Brazil, it's there you're creating a relationship with these entities. You can't just go to them, ask them to do stuff for you. You have to, make a relationship. You give them something, they give you something, like it's a mutual, it's like it's a relationship you enter in on, and
Yes.
you shouldn't do it lightly, And I think that once the kind of, as David Beth would say, like the domination of what he calls spirit or the kind of logos became like the dominant force in the West, particularly with the ascent of Christianity, and then the Enlightenment and everything. I think it's really made this kind of mindset more prevalent, and that it's very selfish, human centric viewpoint. It's not really taking the other world seriously as well as seeing, it's just seeing it as something you can dominate. the Christians thought that you could just dominate the demons because they're Drek anyways, you know what I mean? Like they had no respect for them. So, you know, like there's no respect for anything really. I mean, I don't think Christians have any respect for anything spiritual, you know?
I definitely am of the same mind, and I think the like a latter Goêteia, which we are now criticizing, not the Goêteia of the old. I think Christianity has messed up this kind of thing, and it really shows. You referred to the Creed's magical papyri in translation previously, and I still remember some of the rituals from there. And they were very like in the sense that in some ritual there was something that whoever wrote ritual wanted to have like lots of ladies, so to speak, and it almost felt like that kind of romantic plea of like demanding to get ladies by like a magical means, which is age-old trope. It's completely the same that if a contemporary so-called magician would do some Goetic rituals in order to get a new fucking Lamborghini. I think it's completely the same. It's very material, and I think Crowley said that you could probably use some magical means to walk on water, but why wouldn't you use a boat?
Yeah, I feel like you know, I would only use magic for material means if it's like you know, when you're in need. You know, I think that's when you should do it. You know, you shouldn't be, and I'm definitely not you know, trying to enslave some demon to do it for me. You know, like I just I've always found it very off-putting and very much like kind of a I don't like it. You know, I don't mind reading about that stuff for the history. You know, I have history books about the Goêteia and ceremonial magic and stuff just to understand the history of magic in the West, you know. But I would never practice any of that shit. You know, I think it's pretty useless, you know. And I think that I do think things are changing in the esoteric world, but there's still a lot of people who are real caught up on stuff like the Golden Dawn, you know, even today, you know.
Yes.
Which I just don't understand.
I think it's the same like with Metallica or you know some this kind of like more popular metal. It's entry level stuff, and you of course it's like the same that when I was into reading books when I was like maybe 12 or something, when I had access to the local library, and I was already interested in the esoteric and the occult, but that was before the internet. That was the early 90s. Then, when I entered the library, I, of course, tried to find as esoteric books as I could find. And, of course, what I actually found was the New Age self, which had these like, kind of like healing natural energies books. And maybe some book about UFOs. Maybe that was Eric von Daniken, I would believe. And this kind of stuff. And you couldn't find anything on Satanism or the left-hand path or whatever. This type of stuff you can readily get nowadays very easily from the internet. You can order absolutely anything. And I had to kind of deal with those, and I read whatever I could get, but it would have been completely fruitless if I would have stopped there. Because when I first got internet, maybe it was 95 or something, because my father had he had loaned the internet connection modem from his workplace, and that was quite exotic thing to have in that day because it was like dial-up modem. So I had dial-up internet connection, and the internet was in its fruition. It was just tens of web pages at most. It was very small compared to whatever it's nowadays. So basically, I just scoured the internet and printed whatever I could get, and I think I kind of stumbled upon some kind of stuff about Satanism in some remote dark alleys of the internet, and then after that I kind of fed up with Satanism towards the end of the last millennium, and then I understood that there is the more serious left-hand path, and that has actually never ended. So in my case, it has always been digging deeper and deeper, and it seems to never stop. So in that regard, I think it would be completely, fruitless to kind of stuck in that kind of entry level thing. But most people do that because it's so easy.
Yeah, there's
It
plenty of
doesn't
people
take
who do.
any effort.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who do, and I mean maybe less now, but I would say even in the esoteric world, there's plenty of people who are very well respected who trumpet the praises of PGM and do Goetic magic and ceremony, like, and they're like super in depth about it, and they write books about it and shit,
Yeah.
and some of them are reprehensible human beings too, so it's like, I don't know, like to me, I just don't worry about it too much. The ironic thing is that I am like very separate from the wider esoteric world for the most part. I have, I rarely, like right now I'm reading David Best's Black Pilgrimage, maybe a couple other things that are esoteric in nature, but I don't actually spend a lot of time reading a lot of those books anymore, to be honest. Like I spend a lot of my time reading other things because there's a certain point where you kind of start to feel like outside of like the best of the best, like David Beth or Richard Gavin, or I don't know, reading something like She is a Night, which is really great, or you'll see there's few things. I'll see certain things where I get called. I'm like, yeah, I need to read that. That looks really inspiring,
Yes.
on one topic or another. Outside of that, though, like I guess like I start to think that like reading books isn't going to get you anywhere. You just got to do things. You just got to practice. You just got to exist as an in the esoteric world, like in terms of like you have to have a demonic existence, really, Like,
I definitely agree that it seems like in the West, probably, and in the contemporary world, too many people in the occult world, so to speak, are too cerebral in the sense that it's quite sterile in the sense that it's like some people own a great like volume of books, but then it just kind of stops there. It basically seems that some people are riding like two wagons at the same time. It's a Finnish idiom. In Finnish, it's ajaa kaksilla rattailla, which means you're kind of like secretly getting checks from hostile government, basically being like a double agent in the sense that the other of your feet is on the consensus reality and you are kind of law-abiding citizen of the consensus reality, and you like to kind of dabble in the occult in the sense. And I would believe that you and me and the people we have interviewed in the Mycelium Signal and Sol Nox most often are pragmatist people who are constantly doing something practical. And I think the wisdom is exactly in the practical, in the sense that you experiment, that you sometimes burn your hands or your face, but then you just go on. That's like the alchemist of the old.
yeah, because there's definitely I think a big part of the occult world who like to just buy books and read them and talk about them, and
Yeah.
and I guess like in the end that's fine if that's what you want to do. I don't care. Like I don't care if somebody is like just wants to have like
Yeah.
a gigantic library of occult literature and never do anything with it. That's perfectly fine. I don't care. But to me, like I do care in a sense of like um I do. The one thing I do that does bother me though is just that I think that people get so wrapped up in it. And I think we've all been there. We've all felt the lure of that, like the trap of just buying occult books to buy them. Like of like, um, and then but then you have to stop and think, oh, okay, what am I getting? Like, and so like. I'm just a lot more particular now, because I do think that a really great occult book can be a real huge mind opener. It can literally transmit um see hidden wisdom to you, like even like subconsciously. Like there's so much that a great a book can do. But a poor esoteric book is just a waste of paper, basically, and it's just and being entirely caught up in your only activity is reading books. You can't call yourself I don't know, like I guess an adept or something if all you do is read books. You know what I mean?
Definitely. One book we have been discussing before, I would believe, is Gust Bussé's Anarch. It's from Scarlet imprint, and that's absolutely a great book. It's about the chthonic sorcery, and it's so stark and it's so powerful that it's part like diary and part art book with large photographs by Gust himself. And that's really like back to the roots type of material in the sense that it's absolute hands-on. It's very starkly chthonic. And I remember when I got the book as a gift from my friend from United Kingdom a couple of years ago, when I finally opened the book, and I have already seen the photographs of Gast's ritual artifacts, they had this some kind of similar style to voodoo, and that was absolutely powerful, like black and red colors. And when I opened the book and I just browsed through the photographs, and that was like electric jolt to my head. It was like something was directly transmitted. I felt even dizzy. It was so powerful. And the diary section of the book, the text section of the book was absolutely great too. It was like, this is the real deal. And it was so absolutely powerful, the whole book. I would wholeheartedly recommend the book. Gust Busé, and the book is called Anarch.
Nowadays, I spend a lot more of my time reading a lot of like fiction and stuff like that, like because when I am reading, and I think that might be and some history stuff as well. Part of it is I think that I find it more useful at this point in my life to fuel my imagination than to just sit around reading esoteric occult books all day, And the occult books I do read are books that I read because I want it to spark the imagination in some way,
I think Richard Gavin is a great example how you can fuse horror fiction with actual occult, in the sense that he has written occult books published by Theon, and he also has short story collections, horror story collections, which are obviously infused with the occult. So you can have that both ways, which I think is absolutely great. And I think Kenneth Grant, he also did like this kind of occult horror fiction, Against the Light. I have that book. It was translated in Finnish some year ago. So basically, I think like a good horror fiction or occult horror fiction can be a kind of like a Trojan horse with which you can kind of inject the actual occult ideas and concepts into the reader.
Yeah, I would agree. And Kenneth Grant had a number of them. I have hit a few collections. I think I have the Against the Light collection as well. But I can't remember which. I have one of them. He has a few collections, and he was a big believer in his Typhonian trilogies about the idea of what's the word I'm trying to think of? The idea of how literature can be a big part of like inspiring, like hiding encoding actual esoteric concepts in them, like
yes.
he was a big pioneer in the idea of it, that like the weird fiction of the 20s and 30s have like actual esoteric truths in them, like Arthur Machen and Lovecraft and things like this, and that's why we got Exoxar from the 60 Stone. That was from of course from Machen with the Black Stone, or not the Black Stone, novel of the Black Seal, and then Kenneth Grant picked it up from that and ran with it. Of course Lovecraft used the Black Stone as well, and so did Robert E. Howard and Worms of the Earth. And then Kenneth Grant comes along later, and he's like bringing the Exoxar as an idea to manifest into reality as this type of thing to contact these like Typhonian chthonic entities,
Yes, I think this kind of people like Grant, for example, who was pretty much like a renegade in the sense, or Austin Osman Spare, this kind of like a renegade maverick type of people. I really love these characters in the sense that I think they are like the backbone of the chthonic continuum lineage which we have been talking about, and to somebody who is listening who hasn't heard about this term which I coined some years ago, is basically like a history and the lineage and the web and the mycelium of the people who have been before us. For example, Carl Jung and Rudolf Otto being the most notable figures, and I would believe that Theon Publishing and David Bett and Richard Gavin and these contemporary figures are like the mavericks of our time. And I really admire that there are some people who kind of go against the grain and do their own stuff, and they kind of distill and question everything. If these people are rare, there are lots of the usual church goers, so to speak, like the church people, the audience, the people who just buy books at least, and they don't actually do anything creative. So I think this kind of mycelium needs the people who kind of distribute the spores, because without the spores, and the spores being, for example, the books and the albums, there wouldn't be a next generation of the mycelium. And I would believe that we are doing our own part with our podcast and these kind of discussions. And who knows what the next generation from that, Karls and Konstantins, are thinking, that these crazy guys in the 2020s were doing this kind of like a podcast called Sol Nox or the Mycelium Signal, and maybe we are part of the history. Not that I'm aiming for that kind of like notoriety, but I would just think that I would go easy on my grave when I would understand that I have at least done something to benefit this kind of mycelium, which was so long before me, and it will probably continue after me, or at least that's what I hope for.
Yeah, I mean, we already are in in our own own ways, whatever, small or large. We are part of the history. We are contributing in some way. And I mean, one thing I wanted to bring up before we move on is Richard Gavin has a new story collection called Nocturnal Mirrors coming out, which actually I've already ordered. It's on Swan River Press for €40, so people can look that up if you're
Definitely
interested in. I definitely want to read more fiction from Richard, and I think I'm gonna try to get him back on the podcast to discuss the collection once I get it. I'm having a Henry Ben Edom on the podcast, who I believe I found because of you. So
yeah, I of course know Henry, and he was in my podcast like a couple of years ago, I would believe, and that's great that you're having Henry on.
Yeah. I read his short story collection, which I thought was great, and we're going to have him on the podcast and discuss the book and everything. So yeah, I remember he was on your podcast at some point. I think you recommended that I read his books though. So but they're out of print until his new collection, Trance of Charnel Hearts, came out a month ago. Which I think contains the same stories as his previous one, but plus like a few, so.
Yeah, I believe so. And I think he's a good example that, I mean, it's a good example that I have met a lot of people, including you, via like a strange circumstances, in the sense that it seems this is actually a better example. So basically, I know a lot of people in the scene, this very marginal scene in Finland and abroad as well. And I started like online discussion group, closed discussion group with the people, some people who were in the podcast, and some people I know who are like well versed in the Mycelium Signal territory, and had this group of around maybe 20 people in Finland. And then I just introduced to those people that what would they think that if I would organize a meeting, local mycelium meeting, and everybody was exhilarated about the idea. And we held the meeting a couple of weeks ago, and it turned absolutely great. And when I was having a speech in front of the live mycelium, so to speak, then I understood that I haven't known any of these people basically 10 years ago. So these are all like new people in my life. And then I understood that I got to know you around maybe 4 or 5 years ago, also Nas and Ricard. And it's like basically a whole underground mycelium has erupted after very strange events like around 6 years ago. And it seems new mushrooms or mycelia are kind of popping up all over the world. And this has inspired me to do the Tonic Continuum project to kind of map in which timeline we are at the moment and who has gone before us. So I think this is very important, this kind of grassroots underground thing we are doing right now for the next generation, so to speak.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, I think we're definitely building, there is a world of people, and they're slowly getting connected to each other, and I think that's great. I think that's one of the great things about doing stuff like these podcasts and stuff like that, is we're connecting with all these people, and it's really cool that you're able to kind of make a meeting in person like that. It's an actualization of something.
Yes, I would say that around like maybe 6 years ago, I of course know a lot of people back then, and I think I may have had to try to organize something like this, and it felt like very cumbersome, and it felt like people are so absent-minded or busy that nobody would come to that kind of event. And then, when the time was right, when the Kairos was at place, the right and opportune moment to act with kind of the God's favor when to act. And this happened when I just proposed this idea. Everybody was on board. So I understood that this is the new mycelium. These are the people who are so vital, and they can even, travel from half of the Finland to go to that kind of meeting, to get a hotel room, to come from Estonia, for example. And I was very delighted that people take this thing so much into their heart that they are willing to pay expenses and travel like distances to be there, So this is like something which is very important to them. And of course, it's of utmost important to me too. And maybe in the future, it is possible to do some kind of, maybe in Germany or, in Europe, some kind of like international meeting. Stranger things have happened, and I have experience of this kind of international gatherings from my past life too. So it's not impossible.
Yeah, I mean, it's cool. Like, it's definitely possible. And I mean, I feel like that's the whole concept of the mycelium. It spreads up, and it's all across the world. We're all connected by this hidden demonic esoteric level of, the chthonic level of reality. And we pop up all over the world.
Yes, definitely.
Like our roots go down in the bowels of hell. Like,
Yes, and I think this is like a process that it's kind of veins and waxes. It's like the mycelium is the underground, it is the entity, and then it has the mushrooms in the surface, and they come and go, but the mycelium remains. And the mycelium can also hibernate. And I think there have been eras that the mycelium has indeed been in hibernation mode, but then it gets more moisture and it kind of sprouts up again as the mushroom, which kind of spreads the spores, and then the cycle continues. So I think this is definitely the one of the most important, or if not the most important, phenomena in my life, and I'm very glad to be part of it. And I, of course, know that my own part is quite small in the big picture, but that doesn't take any energy from my efforts. On the contrary, in the sense that it's like, what else I will do with my life,
Yeah. Well, and I think that I definitely think that that there's been times there's hibernation, times where it's more. I think right now is definitely a time where the mycelium is very very much, very nourished. Like, I think that there's a real regrowth. I think more and more people are waking up to connecting to different ways to look at the world, and even ideas like the sacred terror and all these things that we talked about in our very first episodes. Like, I hear more and more people kind of bringing these ideas up. Like they're starting to move through the world, and like, say, the success tasking back to the beginning of our podcast, the success of a movie like The Backrooms, like the crazy success.
Yes.
To me, that's a really encouraging sign. Like, I know a lot of people's ideas that the liminal is pretty thin, but the idea that you're even interested in it, that it's even something that's grasping their imagination, to me is encouraging, because it's that people are starting to peer past the crack of reality a little bit, and movies like that help them see that. And I think it's encouraging that basically essentially an art movie that's like pretty cerebral in a lot of ways managed to make $200 million or whatever. Like,
Yeah.
to me, it's encouraging. That shows that the world is maybe more and more ready for kind of a more drastic shift in consciousness. I think there needs to be a kind of change in the way that we operate with the world. And it's not gonna be everywhere. And you're gonna have the continuation the old way in Christianity and Islam and stuff. But I think that it's important for people as a whole to try to shift in the way that they think about the world.
It's a very healthy phenomenon in the sense that I think The Backrooms, which was indeed like a short film, like a no-budget YouTube short film, it's now the highest grossing horror movie of all time, if I read correctly. And it's basically like a phenomenon. Of course, the liminal phenomenon goes much deeper than The Backrooms, but if you can only imagine that it started as a fucking meme, as somebody posted some like a backroom style photo in 4chan, I would believe, and then it got to Reddit, and somebody wrote some lore to that, and then it came to this Cain Pixel guy, who is the director of the Backrooms movie, who made the short film, and then it kind of like get out of hand, and now it's feature-length Hollywood hit movie. And imagine what kind of like liminal mycelium it's going to spread from now on. It's like a fucking virus, I would believe, and people get infected with liminal, and I would believe it kind of creates a more fertile ground for the mycelia to spread. And one thing I would like to say, that you and my Finnish colleague very well versed with the occult and the horror, and very jaded, and I would say like a very hardcore. And you both actually said to me that you both felt that after the movie, the reality got somehow like infected by the liminal, in the sense that it didn't end where the movie ended. And my Finnish colleague said that some young people stormed out of the movie theater during the mid-section, which apparently has the worst parts of the horror, I would believe, in the movie. I think that's a good sign that it was too much for some people, and the people who are already like very jaded when it comes to horror felt that affected, that it kind of like lingered on. And I was a bit surprised, because if I'm being completely honest, I was very skeptical about the movie. I thought it was crappy Hollywood slop, but it apparently wasn't, and that's a delight to hear. I'm yet to see that movie, and I should tell the audience a funny stuff, that before I was about to record this in this episode with Karl at 7 p.m. with Karl, I was in my neighborhood movie theater. I was passing that by. I was thinking that if that movie Backrooms would be in the movie theater, which I thought not, because it's a very small movie theater, they wouldn't probably play that kind of movie. But there it fucking was. It was playing like 5:15 p.m. And I tried to send a message to Karl that maybe we could postpone the discussion until 8 o'clock so I could watch the movie beforehand, which was my intention anyhow. And I tried to I sent a message via Facebook Messenger, and I was waiting for Karl's response. But then my smartphone said that my messenger had signed off suddenly, which was weird. And then I tried to resign to Facebook or Messenger, but I couldn't. And I later found out that there was a worldwide outage of the Facebook at the same exact time, and that kind of prevented me to watch the movie. So I just thought that maybe maybe this is actually the Third World War, like breaking up with like a massive cyber attack or something, and Facebook is down because this thing doesn't happen too often. So it was like it already set some kind of like liminal threat infesting this recording, in the sense that maybe today is the day.
Yeah, it was definitely a weird way to start the day, because I saw I kind of, I was sleeping, I woke up a little bit, I saw your message, and I was like, well, I'm gonna open up and go, yeah, that's fine, go ahead, and then go back to sleep. And then my messenger just like wouldn't load, and then I was like freaking out, trying to figure out what the fuck was going on. And by the time I got sorted out, I realized that it wasn't working. I was like too awake to go back to sleep.
Yeah.
And it's like, it is a funny thing though. Yeah, it does make you feel like, what's going on in the world, because I mean, it's not unheard of, but for Facebook to go down, but it does make you feel like, who the fuck knows? The world's in a crazy place, and rapidly collapsing under its own excessive complexity, so
yes.
All we can really do is try to get out into the wilderness of the mind and the soul and the body,
I really think that this kind of zeitgeist we have right now, which is very volatile, and it's completely haphazard. We don't know that the next morning you might wake up to the actual fucking Third World War, even, or who knows if it's already on way. We don't just understand it yet. So basically, I think this kind of zeitgeist is quite fertile to the mycelium, because it's rightly deroding the consensus reality, in the sense that the consensus reality cannot sustain itself, because the reality is actually breaking apart. And then they are the like the liberation of the psychedelics, the research like emerging, the ban, and it's like the fucking artificial intelligence is getting out of hand. And maybe it's a like a hype bubble, or maybe it's not. Who knows? We are living in a crazy timeline now, and I think that's like the Trojan horse, or the method the Trojan horse can enter the consensus reality and slowly kind of break it apart.
Yeah, I would agree. You think about a fungus, like the mycelium, like a fungus can break apart, foundations of buildings and things, like it'll come through from the soil and break through walls and stuff, like it's something that does erode the foundations of the kind of structural reality we create for ourselves, and reveal the chthonic depths of what it's kind of feeding upon, and I definitely agree. I think that maybe that's a byproduct. Part of the reason that something quite liminal is so popular is it's kind of actually slowly eroding. Maybe the people who see the Backrooms and walk away from that feeling kind of like the world's suffused with this weird atmosphere from the movie, that it's like destabilizing reality. If enough people feel that, maybe it does destabilize reality. Maybe that's what's going on some level of reality, is that people are being inspired to slowly tear down, the kind of logocentric reality that we exist in.
Yes, it's directly the black iron prison from Philip K. Dick's concept, that it's like some kind of dystopic regime which stems from the Rome, which never ended. In Philip K. Dick's idea, Rome never ended, so it kind of the bureaucracy and the domination just kept going on, and we are living in some kind of hellish dystopic regime that is constantly suffocating any kind of resistance to itself. So it's basically like a cancer. And I would believe consensus reality is just like that. It is like a shackles on the actual 4D reality and the multitude of reality, the true riches of the world. It's basically, it's like a parasite in the sense that it's occluding. It's like a veil which is very thick, but then it's very porous and it leaks. And I think Richard Gavin said it greatly that when the liminal seeps through into the consensus reality, and this is maybe a topic for another discussion, but I have sensed it and experienced it many times that I have, for example, been in the cottage by myself, and there are like two stages. There's the ordinary stage and the everyday life that I'm more interested and invested in my daily life because of work or whatever. And then if I get kind of enough concentrated and diverse from the consensus reality, from the clock, from the chronos time, I kind of start to sense that the whole world is like a haunted house. It is completely alive. And I think this is exactly what the ordinary churchgoer people just don't ever get to experience, that the world is the haunted place. It's like it's the demonic pandemonium. It's like if you scratch the surface, it's always there, even though you don't. Most of the time, probably normal people don't get any hunch of it, but eating everything.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I like that. Yeah, the haunted world. We are in a haunted house, like of the world, and I do think that would be a good, because I do want to close here soon. But I do
Yeah.
think that would be a good product. I just wrote that down for our next conversation, like as a note in my notes, like the haunted house of the world, like this idea of how it breaks through. I think that's important. I really like that as an idea to stem off of,
Yeah.
like because I 100% agree with you, and I do believe that we are always surrounded by things. We are in a teeming world,
Yes.
whether we realize it or not. We're and even like biologically, we are connected to, like we're just looking ecologically. We're never really alone. There's always animals and all kinds of things around us, like we are in a connected universe. We are in a web of weird, and there's no getting away from that.
Definitely.
Modern man can think that they are, this existentialist like hero, like isolate and alone in their wasteland of the absurd, but that's really just a modern mind game, essentially.
Yeah, I think it's a hallucination.
I think so, exactly. I think it's 100% a byproduct of the modern of the human becoming divorced from their reality. You know what I mean?
It's like the main character syndrome.
Yeah, because that, if you think about so much existential like philosophy, like it kind of predicates upon that idea that you're this kind of existentialist hero, like the myth of Sisyphus. You're pushing this boulder up the hill, like, and you gotta, choose to do it or kill yourself, like because you're in the wasteland of absurd, or all this stuff. I understand that because I felt that in the past. I have felt these feelings, and in the past, I used to think that was just a modern metaphor for the catabasis or the negretto, but I've since come to believe that it is not. I've since come to believe that there are two different things. There is the negretto that we go through as we transform ourselves, and we can experience these other feelings because we are in a modern world. But a lot of the modern ideas are because of people's spiritual isolation from the rest of the world, because they have mentally cut themselves off from the rest of the world. And all you have to really do is just flip a switch and go in your own head and realize that you are not isolated from everything else in the world. and
Definitely.
it changes everything, you know.
Yes.
But yeah, I guess we'll close out here in a minute. So it's definitely a pleasure talking with you again, Konstantin. I mean, we did intend to do this earlier, but this is took us a little bit to finally nail down
maybe
today, but
sometimes it's we have this like happy accidents in the sense that if something gets postponed, maybe there is a reason. And I would say that for myself, that in the beginning of this discussion, I was pretty tired because I have been suffering from a bout of night credo after like a very heavy and productive year thus far. But after we began this discussion, I got energized because this is like my life's blood, these kind of discussions and this subject matter and thank you for that.
yeah, definitely. I definitely know what you mean. It's energizing discussing these things. You know, it gives you inspiration. You know, and that's what I hope that it gives other people who listen to it. Is I hope that they feel inspired after listening. You know.
Likewise, yes.
But excellent. Well, I hope everybody enjoyed this, and of course, we'll be back with another episode before too long.
Yes. Have a good night.